Hey, family, and welcome to the Critical Sense Making Sessions, episode 23, facilitated by yours truly, Revolutionary Rika. Today's topic is higher education and student affairs. Today's guest is Ramos. He is a Bay Area resident who is passionate about music for self care, student affair trends, and his Salvadorian culture and ethnicity. Cesar, tell us a little bit more about who you are and choose one word to describe how you're showing up.
Yes, thank you, Rika. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Yeah, as Rika mentioned, I'm a student affairs professional in higher education. I've been working in this field now for, I'd probably say about a decade, and grew up down in Los Angeles in a small neighborhood that we now call Koreatown, which is pretty close to the downtown LA area. So right in the middle and heart of the city. And then I made my way up to the Bay Area to go to school and kind of never left. Went home, I think, after I left college and then came back a few months later. It's been interesting to always see the comparisons between the Bay and LA. I was just in LA. I was able to go down a few times this past year, even during the pandemic, and it's always interesting to see the differences in culture, the way people move, the way people are, the backgrounds. And so I'm excited to be here today. I think a word to describe myself today or how I'm kind of feeling, especially this morning, it's been a tough week. So I think I would use determined as a word for myself today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cesar, for agreeing to be on. And I want to just jump right into our icebreaker question. What is something that you learned about yourself in 2020?
Ooh, what is something that I learned of myself in 2020? I think this is going to be a pretty emotional and deep response. I think what I've learned is that it's okay to cry, even if you don't know why you're crying.
Absolutely.
It's been a tough year. We had a lot of sickness in my family, trying to navigate online school, trying to work virtually. Like, there's so many things that I had to navigate. And going back to my word of the day of being determined, that's usually how I kind of roll. I'm like, okay, let's take care of this. How am I going to do this? Um, but I never, sometimes I have to remind myself, okay, I need to like take care of myself at the same time. And so there were days where I would like be sitting there and we'd be watching like a TV show with my wife and I'd get teary eyed and I'm like, I don't know why I'm getting teary eyed, but I feel like that's a healthy thing to do. And it's been something that I don't schedule it or anything, but it just kind of happens naturally. And when I do, it's just kind of feels good,
Yes.
to just kind of do that.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I'm not a big crier, but I think last month it finally hit me that my grandma passed. And I
Yeah.
woke up and my sister sent a text, and I was like, let it go. You're at home by yourself. Just let it release. Cause I know when I repress them, when I have repressed tears in the past, I'll get triggered later on, and it just comes out in this other form that's not healthy and that's not good for whoever I'm interacting with. And so I'm glad that you shared that because I think we need more of that. You know, holding all that in is it takes a lot to repress those feelings, and it just impacts you in negative ways, and it impacts your health, right?
It does. And you sometimes almost feel it impacting, like you were saying, like other parts of your body. I feel tense sometimes, but usually, you got to find the ways to kind of relieve that tension.
Well, thank you for being transparent and authentic and sharing that. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. And I know some of our viewers would definitely identify with those moments that you were having.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move us into our first set of questions. And first, I would love for you to tell me a little bit about your life growing up in LA.
Yeah. My family my parents came from El Salvador in the 1970s. A lot of my dad's side of the family ended up coming over here to work, to get away from some of the conditions there. My dad came first in 1972, and my mom followed in 76 with my oldest brother. And that's kind of where the journey started in Southern California. I'm the youngest of four,
Mhm.
so I have two older brothers and an older sister. And I've been able to kind of rely on them a lot growing up. My sister's the closest to me in age. So we have our own little relationship where we still even bicker sometimes,
Mhm.
because that's just how we grew up. And, I went to, my parents always wanted to push us to, have a good education and would push us to do what we can. And so my sister and I mostly went to Catholic schools growing up, to private Catholic schools growing up. And that's how my journey with education kind of started, where I started to kind of see the relationship between teachers and students. I had a lot of white teachers growing up, and I didn't realize it. I'll be honest, I didn't realize it, how much that impacted me up until maybe like 2 years ago,
Mm,
which is pretty interesting for me to finally put names and labels to things that I experienced growing up in my education.
mhm,
But yeah, I've kind of gone through Catholic education throughout my whole life up until grad school, when I went to East Bay to get my master's and now my doctoral degree at East Bay.
mhm,
And, part of a large Salvadoran family. My whole dad's side of the family is pretty much here in the United States. And then my mom's side of the family is in El Salvador.
mhm,
So, pretty interesting to kind of navigate that and try to stay connected with family that is miles and miles away and in different countries.
mhm,
And I've only been able to go down there in my lifetime, maybe about 4 times.
mm,
So it's not a lot, but yet we still kind of have that love and closeness with a lot of that family, especially now with technology that we can call and video chat and all that stuff. So it's pretty nice. But yeah, that's kind of what my life has kind of been like. And yeah, it's a lot to reflect on, but that's kind of a snapshot.
mm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing about your childhood. Thinking back on your childhood, what age were you when you recognized that you wanted to go to college?
I think I never really thought of college, but I remember thinking in the 6th grade, I had a teacher who actually still I'm very connected with, probably one of my favorite teachers ever. And I remember her talking about her experience in college and thinking, oh, I can't wait to do that.
Mhm,
My parents, I don't think we ever really had conversations about like, oh yeah, you're gonna go to school, you're gonna do this. There was no plans.
mhm,
And I think for me, I think it was in my head, it was just a natural step.
mhm,
And it helped that I went to a high school that had college preparatory in their title. Like that was their main goal.
mhm,
And their stats are pretty amazing. I think 98% of the high school graduates go to college, and then the other 2% either are in the armed services or doing something else, like the job or internship or something like that. And so they always pushed us. It was kind of a natural thing there that everything we did, every class we took was going to be to get us to that point of going to college.
mhm,
And so, yeah, I remember my junior year when I started to think about where I wanted to go with education and where I wanted to attend school. I had a lot of things set in my mind, and that's what I kind of rolled with for those 2 years while I applied and did SATs and the all that other stuff that ended up costing money to try to get you into higher ed, which I still complain about. Uh, but yeah, I think that's kind of when I started to realize I think this is just something that's gonna naturally happen. And out of the four of us, my siblings and I am the first one to go to a 4-year institution, and to go right away too. So I'm a first gen. My parents didn't go to college, and then my siblings all kind of did education here and there, like getting a year of this type of training and that type of thing. But none of them went to a 4-year institution or right away after high school. I was the only one.
I'm impressed by the stats from your high school, like 98%. I would love to see our schools doing that. I know everybody, working with young people over the years, I know everybody's not going to go to college, right?
Yeah,
But I always encourage them to give it a try just because the things that you learn, I didn't realize that how much college prepared me for life until probably like 5 years ago.
yeah,
Like, well, I have all this information about history and I'm not doing anything with it. But now, It gives me context. It helps me in conversations and even on panel discussions to frame some of the stuff we're talking about.
Hmm.
But I do encourage, and so just to hear that number, 98%, that's impact.
Yeah, they took some pretty good steps to like get us to kind of get acquainted with it. Every year we did a college visit, and they would change it each year from like, okay, we're going to take you to a small school, we're going to take you to a UC, we're going to take you to a Cal State, and then senior year they would actually give us a day off to do the applications at the school library. So they're like, come over here, we're going to help you with it and navigate it so that we're accountable. So they did a pretty good job, and they still have some of those same percentages from what I know of.
Good. I wish we could have those programs in all our high schools. I mean, that would
Yeah.
be impressive. So I'm going to move us into our second set of questions. The first one is, which college did you attend and how did that experience impact your career choice?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I kind of had a plan in my head that I was going to go to UC. I had said, I'm going to UC Riverside. I don't know why. I just said, I'm going to go there. It was far away enough from my family that it was, that I felt like I'd be in a faraway place. And so out of the 5 schools that I applied to, I got into 4. And I remember when it was time to make the decision, I was actually starting to feel torn.
Mm.
And I got the pamphlets, they send you pamphlets like these are the things you can do in the area. UC Riverside was like, you can go to Disneyland, visit this place in downtown LA, do this. And I was like, I've done all that. I've done all those things. What else is there to do there? And then I had the Bay Area pamphlet for where I eventually ended up at St. Mary's College. And it was like, discover this place, discover this park, Muir Woods, like all these different things in the Bay Area. And I was like, I think I want to, learn about a new region within the state. And it was weird because the only reason I applied to St. Mary's is because it was a Lasallian institution, which my high school also was, is run by a religious order of Christian brothers. So our application fee was free, and that was the only reason I applied. And then somehow I ended up coming here. I had no idea where it was. I decided it without even coming to visit the campus.
Wow.
So I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I was just like, I'm going to go to St. Mary's. And I knew it was going to be a little more expensive. But somehow I ended up here. And I remember my parents and I took a trip up here afterwards to just come see it. And we literally just drove around the small campus in the small town. And we were like, wow, this is really nice. So that's kind of how I ended up here, using a pamphlet and kind of like positives and negatives and things like making lists. And that's what kind of ended up changing my experiences here is what ended up changing what I am eventually doing now. So I came in wanting to work in politics, work in government, public office. So I was a politics major at St. Mary's, and I still love it. Who knows, at some point it might be something that I'll still, try to do. I was pretty well connected with the LA area politicians, was able to go to city council meetings. There was one city council person there that went to my high school, so I was able to kind of connect with him that way. But when I got here, what ended up happening was that within my first year, I remember going up to our intercultural center here on campus, and it was on the 2nd floor. So I remember walking up the stairs and meeting the staff, and I immediately kind of just fell in love with the cultural center programming in student affairs and in higher ed. And finally, after like kind of hanging out there and like volunteering for things, I was like, why don't I just apply to work here and get paid to do this? So as a student worker, I worked there for a year, and then that changed it all. The politics, still something like I said, still passionate about, still love, but the programs that I was working on as a student in our cultural center here was just something I was like, I can do this. And it's just been interesting how my path has gone in working with higher ed. For the first maybe 3 years after I graduated, I was more of a temporary employee where they would be like, hey, can we use you here for 3 months? And then I would leave, take a month off, and then, hey, we need you over here now. So I was kind of like an on-call person, which was a really good experience because I worked in our facilities office. I worked as in the technology, cultural center, all kinds of places here. And then I want to say that it was probably in 2012 when I was kind of like, I could do this forever.
Mm,
I could do this forever. And part of the reasoning was that I kept thinking bad about thinking back about my experiences as a student, and especially a student of color in what is a predominantly white institution. And I kept thinking there needs to be more people that look like those students of color. And there needs to be more people that have gone through that experience here and that know how to navigate it. And I still use that, when I'm doing my training with students in different capacities, I still say, the reason I work here is because I want you all to be prepared when you leave St. Mary's, because I didn't feel completely prepared on how to navigate the world. And I especially didn't feel completely prepared to navigate, the predominantly white institution.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
I remember my first day at Cal State East Bay when I went for grad school. I remember I felt like I was in one of those movies where like the camera like pans around you, and I was like, wow, I've never seen so many people of color on a campus. And I literally was like looking around the campus there at Cal State East Bay, because at St. Mary's it's kind of the opposite. Not that that's a bad thing, there are pockets and students of color here, but it was definitely something that kind of hit me in that particular moment. So yeah, that's how I kind of started to do that. I think 2014 I went to my first like student affairs conference,
Mhm.
and I started to see that this is actually a profession, one that is, in my opinion, often ignored,
Mhm.
or at least not acknowledged. But when I saw all these people that were like passionate about like the work that they do in cultural centers and leadership centers, residential life type places, campus housing, orientation, all those things, I was like, I could do this. I love this. And that's how I kind of started my journey in working in student affairs.
That's awesome. It's amazing. I love your story. It's just so, it's and I think that's, I'll say it, but I think that's one thing for me as far as my career around working with
Mm.
students and helping them learn how to navigate the systems, even when they may not feel seen or heard or valued, but teaching them how to,
Yeah.
and teaching them how to be successful at it. Because so many of our students get they get put off by some of these systems, right? The toxicity that sits in the privilege. And so they're like, nah, I tried it, I'm okay. But when they really connect with a faculty or a mentor in that space, I see them thriving more because then they start learning all these resources that are you
Yeah.
know, that are available to you that they wouldn't know unless they did have someone like mentoring and guiding them.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But yeah, it's been interesting to do trainings with students and just have conversations about how to like navigate things that for many other people are just simple everyday things,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to like finances, when it comes to like, how do you talk to a professor that maybe has different opinions? Like it's a lot. It's a lot to do.
Yeah, yeah. Could you highlight some of the ways that you learned how to navigate the systems there?
Yeah. So I remember a particular experience. My first year here, I remember in I had some facilities problems in the room that I lived in on campus. And I remember walking into the residential life housing office, and I walked in and I was like, who are all these people who are
Mhm,
all white? They were all white people. And I was like, okay, I don't have a lot of experience with white people. The last 4 years, my high school was pretty diverse. And I really didn't know how to like talk to people that way. And I don't even know how to like explain it. But there was one person that came up to me, the only Black woman that worked in that office. Her name was Anne. And even after she retired, I told her, I was like, Anne, you were the first person to help me on this campus
mhm,
when I had a problem. She retired a few years ago, but I remember that particular situation as the time when I'm like, okay, now I need to learn. Like, I actually need to learn how to talk to folks
mhm,
and navigate staff and faculty on campus. And so I really, one, I had to learn how to communicate with them. It's kind of when I started realizing that even like my voice would change. Like I feel like I was playing roles, and I was like, okay, I don't really talk like this, but I feel like I need to talk like this to get them to understand where I'm coming from. And so I talk a lot about that with students now, where I'm training, and I'm saying, okay, if you need help navigating, the financial aid office, here's some tips on how you can do that. If you need help on navigating a professor that might have made some sort of biased, comment in the classroom, here's how you can kind of approach that and navigate that. And I do that with all students. But I do especially focus on our students of color that I know are still trying to figure out how to navigate the institution, and also just the higher ed structures, right? Like financial aid is a tricky one. A lot of students just come here and think, yeah, I'll just take out a loan and we'll make it work. And I'm like, yeah, but you got to figure out how are you going to pay for books? How are you going to eat? How are you going to take care of yourself? I have students here who are able to pay their tuition because of the loans, but then they don't eat. Like I literally had a student one day come into the office and they're like, "Hey, do you have any leftover food?" And I realized that it was a pattern. And I finally got it out of them that they like eat once a day because they would just look for leftovers or whatever they could afford. And so yeah, it's tough in higher ed. It's tough for students to navigate some of these structures and processes and policies. I still am trying to figure out myself how to make change and break down certain things and the attention that we put on, SATs and GPAs, and like how they use GPAs to tell someone's story, like if that number says everything about them. Um, and so a lot of those things I like to at least raise that awareness within my trainings. And so there's been things that, at least in my current position, that I've been able to kind of start to get rid of because it's just kind of oppressive, in my opinion. Uh, and yeah, I think as the years have gone on, I've been able to pick up on more things that we need to learn how to navigate and kind of have our students realize how to work those.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience. I'm going to move us into the third set of questions. And so, how do you teach your students? I know you talked about having, my is escaping me, but how do you teach your students how to navigate whiteness in the academy?
Yeah. So if you go back to just a few minutes ago when I was talking about not realizing what whiteness even was as a child, I've had to do a lot of reflection because up until 2 years ago, I never realized that my teachers growing up were mostly white. I never realized how impactful that was in positive and negative. And so that's something that I've been kind of teaching myself more about. And that's something that I appreciate that, as you know, we've had those discussions in our doctoral program at East Bay. And so I've had to figure out how to pinpoint whiteness in different policies and in different words that people use. A good example was a recent one. I had a parent call me one day that only spoke Spanish, and she was like, I need help. I don't know how to navigate the health insurance requirements that they're asking us to have. They were undocumented. They were currently facing financial troubles because of the pandemic. And so I started to look into some of the policies that the institution had implemented. They made sense to me, but then when you break them down, I was like, wait, some of these things are very based on the white Eurocentric thinking. Like, oh, hey, we're trying to help you, so you need to have health insurance that'll help cover COVID related expenses. But that's not easy to do. I mean, some people can't even, get a primary care doctor to like call them back. And so some of those like little policies and decisions that are made to me are very based on whiteness. They're based on this like, yeah, you can just work hard and you'll get this. And it's just easy for you to do, right? And this student was on the verge of not coming back to school because of a health insurance requirement. Like that is probably one of the saddest things that I've ever had to deal with, and a scared parent that really was trying their best to get their son through college.
Mhm.
Uh, some other examples I think include the way we prepare teachers and the requirements that teachers are required to go through. I had a student last year who literally gave up their career in teaching or pursuing that career because they couldn't pass one of the CBEST exams. Like
Mhm.
literally one exam was keeping them from being a teacher. And I thought this student would have been awesome. Like they understood how to kind of like navigate things. They understood how to kind of embrace the different identities within students in their kind of like residencies that they had. They did an awesome job from what I heard. And they kind of gave that up because of one exam, one kind of corporate exam is what I call them, like SATs, CBEST, CSETs, all those exams.
Mhm.
Um, so I feel like I've had to pinpoint those and show people why they're problematic. Every year when we review our undergraduate student handbook, I look at things and I'm like, who came up with this and where did they come from to have to come up with this particular policy and rule? And I wonder if they've thought about, this particular student with this particular identity and if they would, you know, how they would kind of navigate that particular policy. So that's something that I think navigating whiteness is ongoing. It's something that you gotta, sometimes you don't even realize that it's there. You gotta kind of be like, oh wait, that is something that you gotta look into and investigate more. It's everywhere. In
Mhm.
my opinion, it's everywhere. And in all the research that I've done so far and the work that I've done so far, uh, it lives and breathes in everything that we do. Uh,
Mhm.
and higher education embraces it. Like they embrace it in every, from like the president of an institution down to the students.
Mhm.
The way they recruit and hire people, even in student affairs, is very rooted in whiteness. The way they set up interviews sometimes for staff or faculty that are trying to work here, like very rooted in whiteness.
Yeah.
It's all just everywhere. Like it surrounds the work that we do here every day. So it's hard to navigate sometimes, and some days I have to like just take a break. But it's definitely important to continue to like point them out and figure out how to break those down.
Mhm. I would just add too, most of the time it's explicit, but it's implicit too. And so if
Yes.
you're not paying attention, it's all these things will happen. Like you said, when I after taking this, joining the program, I had to look back at my educational journey too, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh wow, every year I can remember things on my educational journey that that impacted me in some way, but that I didn't have the language or the words for, so I didn't realize that it was doing that to me,
Mhm.
until, like, we started this doctoral program. Um,
Yeah, it's funny. The time that I started to realize it a lot more is at the interview for the doctoral program.
mhm,
There was a particular question that I remember Dr. G, shout out to Dr. G,
yeah,
that he asked, and then I was like sitting there and I was like, is this like therapy? Because I felt like I needed to think back in my educational journey to answer the question.
yeah,
And I remember even sitting there for about 10 seconds in silence as I kind of processed this question about like what made you think about wanting to go into this doctoral program. And I was like, in my head, I was like, white teachers,
mhm,
right? Like having so many white teachers and mentors and thinking, wait, why don't these people look like me? And I wonder if they treated me differently
mhm,
back then. And I didn't realize that they were doing it for a particular reason
mhm,
until now.
right. Well, thank you for sharing about that. So I wanna move us into what is DEI?
Diversity, oh my gosh, diversity and inclusion. Yeah, DEI is like what we use now for anything that is diversity inclusion type of workshops,
Mhm,
right? in my work in the Intercultural Center here at St. Mary's, we did a lot of workshops around how to teach people, to be inclusive,
Mhm.
and how to act to be inclusive, and embrace diversity. It's not the best type of acronym to use anymore. I think a lot of folks are saying, like, let's get away from that and just name it. Uh, DEI is what is more acceptable for white people to feel comfortable.
Mhm.
And so, I don't use it anymore. I kind of use it sometimes to like get people to understand something. But yeah, DEI can look different in higher ed, and can look different at every institution. So, for example, there's an institution that I learned a lot and have worked with in Wisconsin, where they implemented a diversity and inclusion program for all faculty and staff. It was completely required. And I used them as a model of some sorts, because they were able to actually get a pretty high percentage of faculty and staff to take the program. And there were actually some consequences built in, so I guess that's probably why. But for the most part, there was a lot of positive feedback. And so the DEI could look like, could be, facilitators going through and teaching you about anti-bias,
Mhm.
could be how to navigate microaggressions. It can look really different. Here at St. Mary's, we're developing one, and we just did a trial version this past fall on having those difficult conversations in small groups and cohorts.
Mhm.
And then I think at one point we even like split up white faculty and staff and people of color
Mhm.
that also work here. And I think it turned into a really positive conversation.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it can look really different. There's some schools that will implement DEI into the curriculum, which is definitely something that I think they need to do more of in higher education.
Mhm.
Some schools will just kind of push it and put the pressure on like that one senior diversity officer, which we're seeing a huge trend of people being hired just to do that. But I think that's a lot of work for one person.
Mhm.
Um, and then we've seen some schools that'll just say, yeah, we have a cultural center and they're going to do all that work.
Mhm.
I think East Bay has the Diversity Center, I think it's called.
Mhm.
So they do a lot of those programs. When I here at St. Mary's in the Cultural Center, I did a lot of those programs where we kind of had student facilitators teach about different injustices and social justice. So yeah, that's what kind of DEI looks like in higher ed. Again, it changes from school to school, and sadly, there are schools that don't have any.
Mhm.
Uh, I remember I went to a conference 2 years ago, and there was a school in Minnesota who just now started having like a diversity course at their school.
Mhm.
I was like, this is 2018, and you're just now acknowledging and thinking, oh yeah, we need to do something to teach our very white student population what people of color are. I was
Mhm.
like, that's interesting.
Mhm.
So it's just interesting to see how advanced some schools are and how some schools are just literally starting out.
Mhm. Absolutely. What are some innovative ideas you have been able to institute at your higher ed institution?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we just did a trial version of kind of like a diversity program, for lack of a better term, and we've been able to shape it to our community, which is really important. I've seen some schools kind of just adapt a program from created by someone else and thinking, let's just put it in there and see if it works. But the problem is that every community and institution is different, and every population is different. So we were able to kind of look through and see, okay, what do we need to do here? What's the most problematic group that needs to probably attend this? Who needs to do this? And I will add that I think a lot of these programs don't work unless we get the not approval, but a backup from the highest administrators. That school in Wisconsin, that workshop
Mhm.
started off with a video from their president, from the
Mhm.
president institution saying, this is important and this is why we're doing this.
Mhm.
And that's really important for anything. So We were able to kind of implement some of those things. We weren't able to get leadership to actually say, let's do this here. Let's come out on a video and support this,
Mhm.
which I think is still problematic at our institution. We were able to get our senior diversity officer to do that, but that's part of their job, so it's not that innovative. But we were able to kind of, fit the program to our community.
Mhm.
I think other things that we do here is that um, I've been able to kind of implement some sort of diversity type of training into all the jobs I've had. And in particular here, since I've worked in 2 departments full time, uh, I was able to kind of come into my current role. So I'm director of student involvement and leadership, and really start realizing how to wipe out the whiteness within this particular department. I remember a student of color one time when I pushed them and I said, "Hey, you should, run for an elected position in student government here." And she said, "Oh, no, no, no." She said, "I can't do that. That's for the white students." Like they said, that's a white space. And I thought that was interesting. When I applied to take on this role and get this job, that was the first thing I thought of. And I was like, all right, how do we get rid of that stigma that student government and leadership and student organizations are white spaces? Um, so some of the things that I've been able to do is really have them change different policies within, especially when student government, which is really based off of or based on governing documents that they've all created,
Mhm.
all documents that they created years ago that were based on whatever students were here at that point, right? And
Mhm.
students change, the population has changed, generations have changed from even 15, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to kind of start breaking down some of those things. A couple examples, we're looking at how to get rid of GPA requirements to hold leadership positions.
Mhm.
It's something that I think a lot of folks don't yet understand where I'm coming from, but going back to my comment earlier, I really hate that we depend on GPAs to kind of tell us the story about a particular person.
Absolutely.
And I really hate that GPAs can take away opportunities from
Mhm.
people. And part of that is because of my own experience. I started off pretty bad in college. My first semester, I didn't feel prepared.
Mhm.
And so I had a low GPA and I had to work my way back up for
Yeah.
almost 2 years, right? Those 2 years, there's so many things I couldn't do because of my GPA number.
Mhm.
Like they were like, oh yeah, you can't hold this position. Oh, you can't have this job because of that GPA is like 2 percentages below, right? So there's things that I was kind of they kept me out of these positions because of a number. And so I've been able to kind of start thinking about how do we get rid of these GPAs and requirements that are just kind of oppressive. Um, Other things include finances for our student orgs and student government have always been very problematic, really weird kind of policies on like, oh, you need to fill out this one paper form to like even get access for your club to buy like club t-shirts,
Mhm.
right? Some of these things that were difficult, they still had like carbon copied forms here when I got here, and I was like, yeah, you need to get rid of those. But a lot of those things, the groups that would get impacted the most from having so many steps and processes were our groups that we classify as diversity orgs.
Mhm.
So our Black Student Union wasn't allowed a couple years ago to buy T-shirts for their club officers because it didn't fall within the guidelines of how to spend of the money and how to spend your money. Things like raising awareness on a festival. They had a Black Arts Festival, and they made it really difficult for them to get funds to even put that on this campus, which would have been really innovative and new. They hadn't had that before, at least in my time here.
Mhm.
So a lot of those things I've been able to just kind of get rid of. And I'm like, okay, how do we downsize this to meet not only this current generation, but also to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible.
Mhm.
So I've done a really deep dive into policies, processes, requirements,
Mhm.
the way we recruit people to be student government and student workers, to be student leaders. I had a student the other day who got an invitation for one of our leadership programs, and they're like, "Why did I get this?" I was like, "Nobody ever considers me for anything." And I was like, "Wow, that's like the saddest thing I've ever heard." But I was like, "You got this invitation because we see that there's potential and that you can do this. Like this is easy for you." And they were like, "Wow." I'm like, "Okay, cool. I'm in." Right. And they did it and they finished the program in one semester. So, that's what we kind of have been doing here in this department. And that's what kind of helps me, it's helped me really just kind of break down a lot of those things that over the last, I would say, probably 15 years have been in place. And now I feel like we've been able to put more trust in our students. And they've been able to see that because in the feedback that I've gotten, I've gotten those words of like, yeah, you make us feel like we can actually make decisions here, that we're not just students and that you're a staff member telling us what to do. Or we appreciate that you're like the most honest staff member we've ever worked with. Up here on my desk, actually, I have a award that I got a few years ago called the Maximum Honesty Award
Oh,
because students were like, "Yeah, you tell us the real things. Like you don't just keep things from us like other staff or faculty might do." So, really something that I love doing, and I continue to try to change things, be innovative. And I will say that this pandemic also opened my eyes into how innovation can be helpful in that when everybody went virtual, this office was already ready. Like we had turned everything virtual already. So we had nothing to actually plan for back in April and March when we had to close down. All the forms that I had, like the carbon copy forms, were all online. I had already been using Zoom for things, like all these things we already were using. And so we finally got like a little bit of praise for that in December when they're like, "Yeah, you all like just kind of walked into this and we're like ready. Like, how did you know this was happening?" And we're like, "We didn't, but we knew that a lot of things had to be online. We knew students loved doing things online and that things needed to be accessible."
thank you. Thank you for sharing all of those amazing things that you are doing there. I'm going to move us into our final set of questions.
Mhm.
I just want to share anything you are doing to educate students on the importance of getting involved in student affairs.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to highlight is, firstly, just sharing with them that this is a career. I think a lot of students don't realize that. And then, we've had, I think maybe in my time here, I can probably think of 5 students that literally left here and were like, "I'm going to do student affairs because it seems like a really good career choice and something that we need more people in." One student ended up getting their master's right after leaving St. Mary's and now works in a residential experience type office in the East Coast. And so I like naming it and I like trying to share that this is actually a career. Because as I said, we often don't get acknowledged. And we've seen that a lot more during this pandemic where they're kind of like, "Hey, can you do this, and this on top of your job?" And I'm like, if student affairs folks were to leave for a day or take off for a week, higher ed institutions would just close and shut down. Like if you think about that, and I always use that line that I'm like, yeah, if we shut down, like if we left, like who would run the housing pieces? Who would run the leadership programs? Who would run student government and advise them through on how to navigate things? Like it would just kind of shut down. So I always just kind of like naming it, sharing articles during training before the school year starts. We do trainings and I always share articles about the importance of some of our offices and departments that make up what is student affairs.
Mhm. I mean, you're answering most of my questions, so I don't want to reiterate, but just curious how you advocate for the needs of your students of color.
Yeah, as I said, like I love being pretty transparent and honest with students. Um, And so I'll name things when we need to name things, even if it makes some of our white students uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So back in August, when we did our training, we did a day of BLM, Black Lives Matter type of discussions. I had them read articles. I had them read articles about BLM across higher ed, and the connection that there could be, and like how they could change some of their own leadership roles and the organizations that they're a part of, so that they can be a little bit more open to Black students. Um, and so I think that I've been able to kind of implement that into different training, into different spaces. I've been able to kind of just uh, give them some resources as well as to like how to navigate certain things. You know, even simple things at times it may be simple for some, but hard for others. So it's definitely something that I'm aware of constantly. You know, I don't work in the cultural center here anymore, but I'm still connected with a lot of the students there. I still help and volunteer with certain projects in there, including like cultural nights and things like that. Um, so it's really something that I really am passionate about, something that I'm always aware of. You know, even when I've had there's a few student committees that I advise, and I sometimes have heard them like say certain things about like, oh yeah, we need to do something about this particular student org. They're problematic. And I'm like, okay, this is like the one student org that is like heavily Black. I think you might want to consider how to like not give them consequences. You got to figure that out and navigate that a certain way, right? You can't just be like, yeah, you've been banned because of this, and let's just give you, you know, let's suspend you or whatever. Like you gotta approach each group differently. And so I really do that a lot with our clubs and organizations that are classified as diversity, with a lot of the student leaders that come in here that are students of color. You know, I've had students of color over the years say things like, yeah, I don't feel comfortable saying things in meetings. And I'm like, all right, that means we need to come up with how to navigate staff, faculty, and students that maybe are different from you type of workshop. And I did do one of those actually this past fall with some students that were like, how do we talk to our white administrators? And I'm like, let's have a workshop about that. And so I held like 3 open sessions with students, and students, a lot of them came, and they were like, wow, this is the most helpful thing I've ever had in terms of how to like talk to and communicate with administrators and leadership. So that's kind of like some of the things that I do currently, and a lot of these things don't fall under my job description, but I care, and I want them to be successful, and I know they'll be able to take that post college too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm impressed with your ability to the responsiveness that you have for their needs. Because most people, it's like, okay, if that's not on my job description, I'm only going to do what's on my job description, right? Because I have all these other things going on. But I appreciate you taking the time to really listen to them and then actually put something in action. Here are some tools. This is the way, you know, educating and equipping them on how to navigate. That's impressive.
Yeah.
So I thank you, sir, Cesar, for your time, for you sharing about your experiences in higher ed and working in student affairs. And so I want to lift up some of the pearls that I heard you say in our conversation. And one was just being courageous and learning how to talk with diverse individuals that can help you learn how to navigate the landscape of
Mhm.
these institutions. I also heard you say every community and institution is different. And so it's important that we create programs that reflect and benefit our communities. Sometimes I know a lot of colleges create programs, but they are not necessarily responding to the needs that the students have. They're just, we're checking off boxes, right?
Yep.
So I appreciate that. Number 3, just your work to get rid of, oh, can't read my writing. I'm gonna come back to that one. The way that you want to eradicate policies, processes, and requirements that limit the ability and access for our students. I think that was very impressive. And then establishing those honest and authentic relationships with students that empower them, empower student voice. It promotes access and opportunity. I think that was throughout the conversation, which I feel like is a highlight of this work. It is what, even in my work in education, it's something that I've always tried to put at the forefront, even before my own self. Just I've, you know, we've all been through college, we've had the help, but how do I empower and motivate these young people to continue and to go on and just pay it forward, I guess, as well. So again, I thank you for coming on and sharing your experience. We would love for you to share out one last word or a piece of advice that you want to share with the listeners, and the last voice they hear will be yours.
Yeah, I think the last piece of advice is with any, honestly, with any career, but especially if you work in higher ed or you plan to work in higher ed or want to interact with folks in higher ed, I think, and this kind of goes back to how we started, is self-care. Self-care is important. And even though I love to go above and beyond my job description, there are days when I'm like, I'm going to do just the job description. I had some examples like that this week. So self-care is important. Saying no to things at any job is important. And I think it's time that we kind of get away from this, like, if you do more work, you're the best.
Mhm.
I think sometimes you just need to do your minimal work, I guess, if you want to say it like that. And that's fine. That's fine to do just your job. Definitely during this pandemic, that's been an eye opener for me.
Thank you.